man? How you doing?
Austin, what's up, brother?
Doing good, man.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh yeah, yeah, you sound good.
Awesome.
All right, everyone, welcome back to Mid Tier Thoughts. I am joined today by TapRackTyler, and we're just gonna flow with it. We're gonna see how it goes.
Yeah, looking
Uh,
forward to this, man. Thank you for having me on, dude.
yeah, no worries. You sound a little bit of faint. Like in you get,
My bad. Fix this mic real quick.
yeah, no worries. So everybody, welcome back. I know we missed last week's episode. Unfortunately, I was out of town. I had an opportunity a pretty lucrative opportunity to go do some security for wildland firefighters for their camps, and it was a pretty good experience. We'll talk about that a little bit further. But it's good to be back. It's good to be back on this. I always hate missing an episode, leaving you guys hanging. So I do want to put out that we did cross 200 followers. So there's more than 200
Hey,
listeners, but there's 200 followers on Spotify. So that's pretty cool.
congrats,
And
man.
yeah, I think I'm always humbled by that. I always think it's pretty cool, especially every time we get a listener from a new country, because I can see the analytics on that, and it's always dope. Like I don't know how you guys find me, but keep it coming.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
So, hey, do you want to kind of give everybody a little blurb about you, who you are, what you do?
Yeah, absolutely, dude. I'm pretty much just a civilian here in California. One of the rare ones that you see. I know people think everybody is a Libby here in California, but that's not the case. Um, Basically, I have a social media. I have a YouTube channel. It's called TapRackTyler, all one word. It's going to be also an Instagram as well. I really enjoy guns. I like to go over kit options, plate carriers, chest rigs, all that good stuff, as well as gear, just a lot of gear as well. So, yeah, man, just pretty much a guy that supports the Second Amendment. And yeah, man, luckily I met you through there as well. So, looking forward to being on here. It's my first time. So, forgive me if I give you a lot of uhs. But other than that, I appreciate you having me on here, man.
Hey, thanks for coming, man. Yeah, we do it live here, dude. So just let it flow.
Right on.
So, so yeah, yeah, no, it's cool to have you on here, man. And I think you do a really good job on your Instagram and your social media. I really like that you get into gear review stuff and you do a lot of good gear reviews, a lot of good product review stuff, but not like in a car salesman type of way, like in a very upfront, like, hey, this is realistic type of way that I like. Um, Also, you do a lot of good coverage on stuff for people who are starting out. I know there's a lot of people out there that are getting into this every day, and they're just like, dude, there's so much. Where do I start? And I think you do a really good job of like really focusing on that.
Yeah, dude, thank you. That's kind of a big reason why I started was just trying to kind of teach people what I've learned over the last few years. During COVID, I kind of started shooting and got really into competition shooting and dry firing and just a lot of range time. And over the few years of learning from others, people that have been shooting a lot longer than me, I kind of just like to teach people the right, I guess not, I don't want to say right, but things that have helped me become a better shooter over the last few years. So I appreciate that, man.
Nice. Yeah, no worries, dude. Yeah, thanks for being on here. So for the last 2 weeks, it's been about maybe a little more longer than that, but yeah, around 2 weeks ish. I've been doing security for wildland firefighters, and it's been really interesting going around doing this. I learned a little bit about the process of fighting the fires themselves, which is something I know I mentioned on an earlier episode that I was kind of curious about. But the one thing that was kind of new to me doing this, the first fire I worked at was out in Montana, and I know that especially in the more conservative states, we have no love lost between us and the federal government. However, when I usually think of federal agencies that I dislike, it usually revolves around ones with three letters, like CIA, FBI, ATF, IRS, DEA, things like that, right?
Yeah.
Um, I was unaware of the absolute disdain that many people in the country have for the United States Forest Service.
Yeah, man, I had no idea as well.
They barely register on my radar as an agency. They're under the USDA. I had no idea that there were people out there that dislike the Forest Service, but there are people out there who hate them just as much as they hate the ATF. Which, granted, you know, we've all got our battles to fight. I've never had a negative interaction or really any interaction prior to this with the Forest Service, so I never really had anything to go off of. But as an example, I was talking to some of the people there that were the firefighters. They'd fought fires in that area last couple of years. And about 3 years ago, there had been a guy who was so fed up. He was so fed up with the Forest Service presence that he actually. Oh, hey, it sounds like you got something going on in the background there, man.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Okay, sweet.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no, he said there's a dude who got so fed up with the federal presence there that they had some helicopters that they were doing like water stuff with. You like hauling the water buckets and dumping them on the fires. And they had another one that had a big like kind of thing hooked up under it, and it was doing like IR scans to figure out where the hot spots were. And this guy took shots at the helicopter. Like, I was like, dude, they're putting out your fire, man.
Yeah, that's
like
nuts.
It blew my mind. A different dude, I guess 2 years ago, they flew some firefighters out on a helicopter to go drop them off near his land because his land butted up against the national park. And they dropped him off like right on the border of his property, and he held them at gunpoint till the sheriff showed up. And he was like, escort these people off my land. So, well, it made me really feel pretty proud to be an American, knowing that there's still people like that. But it just kind of blew my mind. I just didn't expect that with the Forest Service, man. Like,
yeah, dude. Obviously, being here in Southern California, not too many forests, at least in my area where I'm at. But I couldn't imagine that either, dude. I had no idea, man. Never heard of that before.
Yeah, I mean, like I always figured like the Forest Service was like, the park ranger that chases Yogi Bear. I didn't even know they had people who were armed. Like I didn't even know park rangers had guns until recently.
They were people that come and help, like you're saying, during fires, stuff like that. Like I thought it was a good organization as far as people were friendly with them. I had no idea, man.
Yeah, I thought your park ranger was like, the person with the funny hat that tells you about like, oh, back in 1874, they built this fort on the river, Yeah. They're basically like forest tour guides, but I was wrong. So, yeah, it was interesting. One of the big things, too, while I was out there that kind of caused a lot of tension is they have this helicopter, and I'm sure there's more people out there that have more knowledge on this than I do. I know there are, but basically I'm going to do a really bad job of describing this. But it has a helicopter, and they basically – it's not napalm, but they basically drop fire out of it, right? And the idea is they create a fire line where they can do a back burn, meaning like they're going to burn part of the forest away in an attempt to rob the approaching fire of fuel.
Got it.
Basically, to make a line of like these trees are now burned up. When the fire gets here, it will not be able to burn past them.
Got it. I've seen that before.
Yeah, so however, granted, this is shortly after the Maui fire, and a lot of people are what they just see is a government helicopter dropping fire from the sky. And so you could imagine how people felt about that.
Yeah, dude, that's nuts. How does that work as far as the fire coming from the helicopter? Is it not like going to flame until it's halfway to the ground type of thing? Or
I don't quite understand the mechanics of a lot of it. I was just talking to one of the firefighters out there, kind of discussing with him a little bit more about like how they get the back burns done on some of those really remote, really hard to get places. And he was just kind of explaining that basically it's a helicopter that it's some kind of machine mechanism deal they got hood rigged up. Again, I'm doing a terrible job of describing it, but it's basically just like spits fire out, and they do it low enough that you can basically you catch enough trees on fire and burn a path.
Honestly, I'm just picturing it right now. It seems kind of badass, honestly, looking at
oh yeah
fire coming out of the heat.
Yeah, like but I mean, I could definitely see where people are coming from, like after having the Maui thing and all the stuff going around about fires being started on purpose, and then seeing a government helicopter dropping fire out of the sky.
Yeah, no, I get that part for sure.
Yeah, so I totally understand where the people are coming from. But it just kind of shocked me at the level of that. One of the other things I experienced, too, was then after that fire was over, I went to another fire near Mount St. Helens in Washington. And I was sitting there at a roadblock. and basically just making sure that the forest road was closed for multiple reasons. Like one, they were fighting a fire right off the side of it. The other side was that there'd been a washout, so the roads were super sketchy. And this dude rolls up in his '04 Corolla and was ready to fight me over the fact that I wouldn't let him go down the road so he could pick huckleberries. Like this dude was like violently aggressive over this.
Oh my
Like
God.
this guy was like, "I'm ready to throw down right now." I'm like, dude, this is an entire mountain of huckleberries, my guy. Like, just pick a different spot.
Yeah.
So it was kind of wild. I again, talking to a couple of the Forest Service agents, they were like, "Oh yeah, the locals hate us,"
Dude,
which I
know,
kind of
right?
understand. Like if a road is closed, they're the ones closing it. If it makes it inconvenient, I get it. But it was just like I didn't realize that this was even an agency prior to this, let alone that people didn't like them.
Yeah, for sure. Likewise,
Like
yeah.
I figured, yeah, it's a government agency, it's big, it's bloated, it's inefficient, whatever. But I didn't realize there were people out there that are like, those government a-holes, like, I hope they all burn. You're like, holy crap, dude. These guys are trying to save your house. So, yeah. So, while I was out there, though, I had a lot of time on my hands, as you can imagine. Brought a couple good books with me that I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit and kind of discuss some ideas with. And I know you've done a lot of stuff, and we've collaborated a little bit on things on like the Minuteman lifestyle and Minuteman logistics. And I think there's a lot of cool lessons from these books that can be factored into this. So the first book I read was called Shock Factor by Jack Coughlin. And Jack Coughlin is a retired Marine sniper and sniper instructor.
Okay.
And so he wrote the book Shooter, which is not like the Matt Damon movie. Basically, Mark Wahlberg. Sorry.
No worries. No, I just want to make sure.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's not that. It's not that. Basically, what he did is he wrote a book that was based on his experience of how he basically kind of revolutionized the Marine Corps' method on using snipers. Where before him, it was kind of this idea where the traditional use, you put a guy in a ghillie suit in the middle of nowhere, have him wait for a couple of days for the right shot, shoot some dude from a crazy distance and then sneak away and no one ever knows, right? And his idea was, well, while we could do that, however, what we could also do is we could utilize this incredibly lethal asset and move him from place to place to place, letting him do his thing. And instead of like focusing on taking out one high value asset, like if there's a unit that's in trouble, you could have this sniper team move to it and engage the enemy and use their skills to just start wiping people out, right?
And not even people don't even know where it's coming from, dude. That's crazy. I get it. That makes sense.
So that's how he kind of started. So that was his first book. So the book Shock Factor goes into a little bit more detail and kind of gives a little bit better of an understanding of the average sniper and sniper team and some of the things they accomplished during the global war on terror. Kind of his whole take was snipers get a bad rap, right? The media basically makes them all out to be like psychotic baby killers, right? And that's not the case. So he was kind of explaining some of the things they do. And one of the big takeaways from it was this thing he called the shock factor. And so the shock factor is the effect that a sniper can have psychologically on to an enemy force. And he describes it like this. Let's say you have a bunch of dudes in a trench like World War I, and they roll up out of the trench. There's machine gun fire, there's explosions, there's constant noises. Your average soldier is telling himself it's a numbers game. There's so many rounds in the air, but there's also a ton of people. Odds are, like, he's hearing a bunch of gunfire and he's not going down and no one else around him is going down, or, one or two, like, people here and there, but, like, enough to where, like, the ratio of shots fired versus people going down, he's thinking, like, okay, the odds are in my favor. However, the shock factor of the sniper that he was saying is, now imagine that same scenario, but instead of constant gunfire, there's one shot fired and a dude drops dead. Then there's another shot fired and another dude drops dead. And for every round fired, a body goes with it. That starts to do something in a man's brain where it starts going like, okay, there's no second guess. There's no chance. There's no like, hey, there was 50 rounds fired from a machine gun and one guy went down. The odds are pretty good. It's every time I hear a round, it's like Pavlov's dogs, right? Every time you ring a bell, you start to salivate. except this is every time I hear a round fired, it means someone's dying.
His
And
body's
that could be
dropping
me.
every round.
Exactly. It's like that could be me.
Yeah.
And so it plays a bigger psychological effect. And some of the examples that he gives from some of the stories is one of them. There's a couple guys, these jihadi guys are coming down this roadway. There's about 10 to 15 of them. And they're working their way towards an American convoy. And they don't know that they can be seen by the sniper team. And so they kind of put two and two together, figure out what's going on. And so he just puts one round square in the chest of the first guy. The first guy drops, and everyone just immediately stops in their tracks. And that's what he talks about, that shock factor, right? Everyone just stops in their tracks and is like, what the hell just happened? Like,
Yeah.
Johnny was alive 1 second ago. Now he's not. No one knows what happened. All I know is I'm wearing Johnny's brains, right?
Yeah, that's nuts,
And
man.
then like that second shot fires and your other dude drops. Now all of those people, their brain kicks into gear and goes, oh, hell no.
That might be
And
me.
they all hightail it for cover and start trying to get out of there. And it was one of those things to where 2 rounds took 15 people out of the fight, right? So that's the kind of effect that he was talking about that could have. Another example of not even having to kill somebody was he was talking about how he had been in Somalia during the time of Black Hawk Down. And on one of his Overwatch missions while he was there was a group of teenage kids, probably around 14, 15, and they had an M1 Garand. And they were all kind of going back and forth about, who's going to be man enough to go kill the Americans. And he's like, man, I don't want to have to shoot a kid, but I'm not going to let him kill any of the Americans. Well, what he did was really smart was the kid was like kind of dragging it behind him, like kind of holding the upper end of the barrel and kind of letting the buttstock drag on the ground. Mm-hmm. So the guy just put a round right through the stock of the M1, freaked the kid out, dropped it. They all kind of scattered. And after a while, they kind of started to crawl back towards the gun. And so he puts a round between the kid and the gun, throws the round in the dirt, scares the living hell out of them, and they all take off, And it's that shock factor that, like, someone is watching you, they can get to you, and you have no idea what's happening.
That just shows how important for any team scenario, any tribe scenario, I feel like how important the DMR role is. Having a DMR on the squad, a designated marksman, I just feel like that's huge to have. How much effect it can have, like you said, on the whole field, as opposed to, like you said, if you hear a gunner going off or a machine gunner, you kind of know where the rounds are coming from. You know where to avoid or how to get around, type of thing. Like you said, you don't see bodies dropping necessarily, so you still have a chance, or you still believe there's a little bit of hope. But when you see, like you said, one round go off, one body drop, another round goes off, another body drop, that's pretty freaking accurate fire. We have no idea where it's coming from. We got to get out of here. Like you said, that's huge.
The other thing too is, I think, like, on a smaller team level, it's easier to implement a DMR or a sniper team role than it would be, like, just logistically, than it would be to have, the difference of like a machine gun. Like, a lot of us don't have the capability of having a machine gunner or having some type of, artillery support or air support or something like that. You can get creative, sure, but no one will ever reach that level as like a military asset. Whereas if you have someone who could reach out and touch somebody with that capability, and you can put that standoff distance and then cause that kind of psychological fear and trauma on an enemy, that is something that is more capable as a civilian fire team, I think, than and more logistically capable than the idea of the machine gunner. While there are ways around that are still capable, I think it's that again, coming back to that sniper team, has just a certain psychological effect to it that's easier to capture as a civilian than it would be the other ways to go. Because I think that even going back to like the American Revolution, you have militiamen who've been training with this rifle their entire life, smoking British officers, at 200 yards, which is an impressive distance with a musket, and they can't reach back and they can't shoot back because their rifles don't have that good a range, and your entire chain of command's now dead.
Yeah.
So it definitely has a pretty significant effect. So that was one of the lessons I took away from that book that I thought was pretty important, and I thought would be.
That's huge.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I thought it would be pretty easily applicable, to a team setting, to like a Minuteman type of setting.
Absolutely.
I think it's
Another thing, sorry to talk over you. Another thing, like you said, though, I want to go back to is how you said it only takes a couple rounds to literally pretty much control, or just like you said, add that shock factor and make these whatever the targets may be, the other people, make them scatter and kind of just either, it's just a couple rounds compared to a whole, a bunch of rounds from a machine gunner or even a rifle team type of thing. Like it's just, and you're talking from 400 or 500 yards out, potentially even more. It's like that's huge, man. So I feel like that's a huge, like you said, it's a important role, but it's also more realistic, I feel like, and especially being here in California, where we all know is an anti-gunner state. So one thing, it's hard to get a machine gun over here. Two, it's a lot easier to get a bolt type of gun, or even like an AR-10 or a 308, like something semi-auto, or something with a little more precision, to where we obviously can't get automatics over here unless you're LE or something like that. So uh, that's big. I like that, man. It's important. That's important. Makes me open up my mind to a lot.
Yeah, I think it has a pretty you can easily apply it to a pretty significant wide range of tasks. The other thing that he talks about too is also the importance of intel gathering, right? Through a sniper team, that you have someone who is trained to look for targets at long distances, stare at them for long periods of time. They can get a lot of info that way too. That could be just as valuable or more valuable than taking that shot. So they're basically learning somebody's life through a scope, so they can learn very minute details about things, and pass all that along. But yeah, I think that the idea of that shock factor really stuck with me as like something that's like, wow, that's something that could really go a long ways in the Minuteman community. But
Yeah, dude, I want to
um
read that book now, man. It sounds interesting.
yeah, it's again Shock Factor by Jack Coughlin. It's pretty good. But yeah, so that was the first book I read, and learned that lesson from there. The second book I read, I made a post about recently. It was a book by Michael Shera called Killer Angels, and Killer Angels is basically it's the book that the movie Gettysburg was based on, and it basically uses historical accounts, kind of dramatizes them a little bit,
Great movie.
and oh yeah, great movie, goes into detail about the hows and whys of the generals on both sides and commanders on both sides, how they fought, why they fought, and in great detail the thinking that went into Gettysburg on both sides. And I learned three lessons out of that, and we'll kind of discuss them a little bit here. But the first one I learned out of that was the vast difference in how warfare is fought from 160 years ago to now, and the importance of intelligence. Just to kind of give an example, it blows my mind reading these two books back to back, reading the book Shock Factor, that 2000, some of the stories take place as early as 2004. And even then they've got, all kinds of intel. They've got planes up ahead, overhead. They've got all kinds of information. I mean, they'll let you know when new guys enter the battlefield almost instantaneously.
Yeah,
Meanwhile, 1863, Lee marches 70,000 people from Virginia to Pennsylvania without getting caught.
mind blowing, dude. I was reading your post earlier. Great post, by the way. That's insane to me.
Yeah, it's a crazy thing to think about, and when it comes to intel, like, one, the Union didn't have great intel as to where they were going. Basically, they just sent 100,000 troops and said find them, and the Confederates, they sent out their guys, and the Confederates also had no idea where the Union was, because they had sent out some cavalry to go look for them, and the cavalry captain got too busy chasing glory to do his job. So the Gettysburg was all kind of a fluke that kind of just happened upon each other. And because of that, some very poor decisions were made, because no one quite understood the severity of what was happening until it was happening. And no one really understood, like Lee didn't really understand he was going up against the entire Union army until they were already there.
Yeah.
And it was too late to do anything about it. On top of that, one of Lee's generals in the beginning of the conflict, they'd all been ordered not to start a decisive action. Lee wanted to find the precise moment. His whole goal was to go into Pennsylvania, destroy the Union army, or find an opportunity to weaken the Union army enough to where he could enter D.C., hand Lincoln the papers that say we're free and independent now, and you have to recognize it because we're in D.C. What you going to do about it, right? That was the whole goal. And so while they're up there, he tells one of his generals, "Hey, do not press a major action." Well, his general, again, due to bad intelligence, thinks that there's just a couple of militia guys up on a hillside ready to fight him. Some locals have gathered together with their farms and pitchforks to face the army of Northern Virginia. Yet, little does he know, he's facing some of the Union's crack troops, and they are Union cavalry from John Buford's brigade, and they wind up putting up a hell of a fight that stops the Confederacy in their tracks and inflicts pretty significant casualties. So again, poor intelligence, the guy thinking, oh, it's just a bunch of yokels with shotguns at best, and winds up upon some of the hardest fighting troops in the Union Army, and is now like, well, crap, well, you told me not to start a fight. Fight started, better run with it. So at this point, it comes down to Lee, who tells one of his commanders, okay, well, now that we're here, we have to fight. And so if we have to fight, what I want you to do is I want you to take your men, go over here, take the high ground, if practical. And so, again, this comes back to lesson number 2, which was the importance of clear communication. And so he told him, hey, if practical. Well, that has a wide variety of meanings, right? So your practical and my practical might be two very different practicals. So instead of telling him like, hey, take the hill at all costs, he's like, no, take the hill if it makes sense. Yeah. So this guy goes up there, fights a little bit, gets kind of beat up a little bit, goes, nah, it doesn't make sense, not doing it.
Different mindsets, man.
Yeah, so he doesn't take the hill. Well, what winds up happening is the enemy, the Union army, winds up taking the hill. Well, now that the Union's on the top of the hill, they have the high ground. They begin entrenching themselves and digging in. So now it comes to the fact that now it's if they want to take that ground back and go with their original plan, they will have to fight an enemy that outnumbers them by 30,000 men. They will have to fight running uphill into enemy fire the entire time, up steep terrain against an enemy that is entrenched and can shoot them from multiple sides. And they realize that, like, crap, we kind of messed up here. So again, clear communication, not really being all that great. And clear communication, again, going back to on the other side with the Union, you have Major Chamberlain, who's the commander of the 20th Maine, and the Union Army has their whole force spread out like a fishhook, right? And he has his forces at the very end of the Union line, at Little Round Top, at this hill, and he's told, hold to the last. And a very important part in the movie has a little internal commentary where he goes, hold to the last what? The last man, the last round, the last rebel soldier, like the last what? Right? Again, not very clear. And winds up fighting off multiple attacks by the Confederacy, who charges the hill 8 or 9 times. He runs out of ammo, fixes bayonets, charges down the hill, pushes the enemy back, saves the day. Yeah, but on the Confederate side, all of this could be summed up by clear communication, right? Had orders been given clearly, this whole situation could have been avoided for them, but they weren't.
Yeah, intel and communication sounds like so far big.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Which then leads kind of into lesson number 3, which is understanding the reality of on the ground and the reality of the people you're dealing with, right? So the reality on the ground was that basically, in all realistic aspects of it, like looking at it, hindsight is 2020. The Union is in a spot to where they are very comfortable. The Confederacy is not, and General Longstreet, Lee's second in command, is basically like, hey, so let's just kind of leave a small number of troops here, make them think we're still here. We'll dip out, sneak up behind them, get between them and Washington, D.C., find a good place to hole up, and we'll just let them crash against us, like just throw men at us left and right, and we'll just gun them down. And Lee is like, no, we're already here. We can't retreat. That would be dishonorable. Honor demands we meet them on the field. So because of that, Lee has this idea of this Southern gentleman and this orderly, gentlemanly warfare, and our courage will carry the day. It doesn't matter our numbers. And granted, part of the reason for this is because basically up until that point, that had been working. That's kind of what they'd done, and it works. But this was the one time it wouldn't, and instead they marched 15,000 men across an open mile field into enemy fire from 3 sides. And by the time that they had reached their objective, which they did reach, there was nothing left of the force that had gone.
Out of 15,000.
There's a very famous scene in the movie where that whole division had belonged to General Pickett, and General Lee comes along and says, General Pickett, sir, you must reform your division and prepare for a defense. And he goes, General Lee, I have no division. So you can just imagine these guys watching basically what they considered their sons being just gunned down en masse, knowing that all because of one man's stubbornness, they couldn't change the plan. And so they were left to failure. And ultimately, Gettysburg is kind of credited as the turning point of the war that really began to see the Confederacy start to fall apart. And it's one of those things that taking the lessons taken from there, I think you can again apply these to a Minuteman setting in the sense that, one, intelligence is huge, right? For any mission planning or anything that you want to go do, you need to have proper intel. You need to be able to communicate with people clearly. And the biggest part I think we need to learn how to apply in the Minuteman community in that sense is understanding the people you are working with and their personalities and how to work with them, right?
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, like an example, like whenever Lee says, hey, take that hill if it's practical. The general that he told to do that general was a very cautious guy. He was new to command and he was very cautious. And so his practical was not the same as a senior commander's, right?
Yeah, different mindset.
Yes, exactly. And so they even make note of that in the book that like he was a newer commander. This was kind of his first couple of weeks on the job, and it was like, hey, we'll see how he does. And this was kind of a test run for him. And so the thing was, if that guy had maybe had a little bit more confidence underneath him, he might have been able to to just charge ahead anyway. But because he was cautious and new to command, he didn't, and cost him the advantage and basically cost him the battle. He later reflected on the battle and basically said there was a great number of mistakes that had to go into losing that fight because of how perfect of a situation we started out in, and most of those mistakes were mine. And so, that's one thing to where if you understanding different generals in that battle as well were overzealous to get into the fight, so they ignored some of the consequences of their actions and just charged ahead anyway, risking everybody else. And so it's one of those things to where if you are to work in a team setting, as you learn the people in your groups, I think it's important to take that time to kind of learn people out and figure out like, hey, if I'm going to give this guy any kind of independent command, if I say, hey, I was like, hey, you, Tyler, you take these 3 dudes and go do mission A. I need to have an idea of how you operate to know like how clear of instructions I need to give you. Like I should probably give you pretty clear instructions to begin with, but I should also understand that like, are you a cautious guy? Are you kind of a balls to the wall dude? Are you somewhere in the middle? Like if I tell you, hey, go do this, I should know if you're going to take a more cautious approach to it, or if you're going to be like, hell yeah, let's go, brother.
Yeah, no, big time. Yeah, that makes sense. Like you said, knowing who you're working with and who you're talking to so you can explain it properly. It sounds like it had to do a lot of, for one, like you said, how big recon is and how big intel is, but also that guy's pride, I feel like, kind of obviously was huge because it got in the way of strategy. Because I'm not sure who you said mentioned the first plan, but that sounded pretty strategic to me as far as faking the retreat. Sounds like pride and courage got in the way.
Yeah, that was one thing I saw in the movie was that General Longstreet, as he was portrayed, was a very like sensible guy. He's like, I don't care about honor, I care about winning, right? Like, I don't care if my honor is soiled. I want to win. I don't care if I'm not a gentleman. I want to win.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the other generals were like, no, that we are gentlemen. We do not fight in this manner, you know? And
Reminds me of
that's the,
people in politics lately who we used to have and who's here now.
yeah. And so it's one of those things where I think pride's a big part of it too. And I think, unfortunately, especially in this community, we see a lot of that where
Yeah,
like people are just not open to criticism at all.
big time.
And, or they're very standoffish with it. You know, like prime example is, I do my best to try to be pretty humble and understand that like I don't know everything. And I've made posts on here, especially when it comes to comms, to where I got some of the comms dudes and they just rip me a new a-hole on some of my opinions. And I'm like, you know what, dude? You've got more knowledge in this than I do, and I'll bow down to that, and I'll admit I don't know everything, and I'll learn.
Yeah,
Straight, you know. But to get, if I were to one of these people to go, if you're one of these people that goes up there, you're like, no, screw you. I know what I'm talking about. I know all. I don't need you telling me how to do this.
oh no
You
way.
know, that's a really bad mindset to have as someone like this, you know, or to not listen to outside opinion or someone who's like, hey, not a bad idea, but what if we did this?
That's how you grow, dude. Yeah, big time.
Yeah, so I think that's part of it. That luckily, I think the community is starting to get a little bit better at that. But I think that that's one thing that we could definitely work on. Is there's, you know, having trained with different people in different groups. I think that some people get very prideful and are like, nope, this is the way we do it. We only do it this way. It's always this way, and they're not open to learning new things.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just becomes a mess.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. I don't know if it's like I said. I started getting into guns and firearms back in 2020, but for the most, which isn't that long ago, obviously, but for the most part, I feel like everybody I've experienced in this community has been nothing but helpful. But a lot of them have all said the same thing. People that have been here longer than me, they've all said that it's gotten a lot better. That it was pretty rough as far as not rough, but I guess more standoffish, more I know the right way, your way is wrong type of thing. Instead of hey, let's help each other where we're smarter in certain areas or have maybe more knowledge in certain areas. Let's help people that have less knowledge in that area and let's gain from where they have more knowledge. Because that's, dude, I'm learning every day, dude. Literally every day, especially from social media. I know social media can be bad, but I've learned a lot. And obviously that's where I met you and obviously a few other cats that we're close with online. But yeah, man, always being able to grow and not think you know everything, dude, is like you were saying, that's huge and that's gonna help everybody just like improve and just become, like I said, a better, more knowledgeable, not just shooter, but just in general in life, man. That's huge. I like how you said that.
Yeah, I just think it's one of those things that I, you know, not to sound too cheesy, but it's like I feel like I'm like a student of life, man. Like I'm always learning something, you
Yeah.
know. And I think that's where you should be. Like if you feel like you know everything about a subject, you probably don't. You know, super easy example of this. I remember when I was active duty, I was like the gun guy in my unit. And I was like, oh yeah, ask me whatever you want. I know whatever you want to know about guns, dude. I'm so squared away. I got this, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, had this really big chip on my shoulder. And then I went to go work at a gun shop, and I met some people there who had way more knowledge than I did on certain things. And I was like, oh my gosh, the longer I work here, the more I realize I know nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I learned a lot, and I learned a lot from them. But it was just one of those things where it was like a very humbling experience that needed to happen to be like, hey, get off your soapbox. You don't know everything. You need to learn new ways of thinking and think outside the box, you know? And I think that's one thing that, again, the kind of lessons learned from that book was people were so set in their ways that like, nope, this is what we're doing, you know? And whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, we're going to, oh, it sounds like we got the dogs in the background.
Yeah, shut the door. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're good. I was, you know, good, bad, or indifferent that you know, that we're just going to go with it. And it's like, dude, you clearly can't win a battle like that because that's what happened is they lost. And, you know, you're just not going to be successful like that. You got to listen to other people's opinions. And granted, they might not have the right opinion, but hearing them out like gives you a different way of thinking and makes you think outside the box.
Yeah, big time, man. I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. You know, because you never know who's going to have the solution to your problem, you know? So it's one of those things where it's like you also have to be able to put your pride away. And I think that was part of the issue with that. Looking at this from the book's perspective is, there was this pride there that was like, well, we've never fled before the enemy. We won't let them see us retreat. Like we have to protect our Southern pride, and our honor demands it. And it's like if you'd have just said, screw it, don't care as long as we win, and did some sneaky, a little bit of sneaky,
Mm-hmm.
you could have won, and you could have, history could have been changed forever. Um, but it's not obviously not what happened. And again, it just comes back to it to where I think there's a lot of lessons in there. And again, I also think that for those listening to like, it might not be the cool thing now, but like if you don't like to read, like get an audiobook or something, but start digging into some military history and start learning from, like what kind of some of the lessons learned there, like I understand obviously like learning about the tactics of the Civil War might not be the most applicable in 2023, but being able to, like obviously we don't stand in lines, and just shoot muskets at each other from 200 yards.
Let's learn from our
But
ancestors, dude. Huge, big time. Let's learn from blood that has been spilled, man.
yeah, exactly. So it's like I don't think we're ever going to see the return of us standing in straight lines and shooting at each other again, but you know, learn from some of the mistakes of things like, oh, hey, this guy was trusted with a certain task, but he was incompetent. Why was he incompetent? Oh, because of this, this, and this. Huh. If I'm going to task someone in my group, maybe I should make sure that, especially like groups that shoot together all the time. And I think one of the things that came to my mind with this was like, maybe you have a guy on your team that you might assign a task because he's your buddy and he's your friend, right? But he might not really be the best guy for that. But you don't want to have that conflict or hurt his feelings with it. So you assign him anyway. Well, in a normal situation, just going out and training in the woods and stuff, maybe that doesn't have any bearing on it, right? But now when it's like, hey, we have to do this task or people will die, maybe now is not the best time to get your buddy to do it, even though he might really think he's qualified for it. So you need to be able to know like how to make those discernments, as well as like how to communicate to both of those people so you don't lose their trust or faith by either way.
Yeah, can't be playing daddy ball in a time like that, dude, for sure. That's huge, man.
Yeah. I think that was one thing too that I was really interesting from a leadership perspective. I think it was something that was really interesting from a leadership perspective. Again, coming down to things that you people could learn is the idea that even though Lee lost that battle, like a lot of his army was still loyal, and they didn't blame him for the loss. Some of his commanders did, but a lot of the guys on the ground, he had like this idol worship almost of him by his troops, and it was just the way that he treated people and his down to earth sense of nature, and his I want to suffer with the boys as they suffer with it, kind of made them look at him as one of their own. Like they were really loyal to him. And so I think the ability to inspire loyalty is a double-edged sword. It's one of those things where it's really good from a commander's perspective, but you can't let it get to your head, because I think Lee let it get to his head a little bit and just kind of thought like, oh, I am the person that these people think I am, and maybe we are unstoppable.
Yeah, that makes sense. I got to go watch that movie again now, dude. And I want to read that book.
I know.
What's the name of that book again?
Killer Angels.
Killer Angels. I got to read that, dude. That
Yep.
one and the
Shock
Factor. Definitely going to read those two. Or sorry, wow.
Yeah, they're very.
Was it Shock Factor?
The first one? Shock Factor.
Got it.
It's Shock Factor, the story of snipers in the global war on terror.
Two great books, it sounds like, man.
Oh, dude, it was a really good way to pass the time.
Yeah.
Learned a lot, took some notes, and it was one of those things where I know this episode's a little haphazard, but I had a bunch of ideas rolling in my brain for the last week and a half, and I was like, oh, I got to throw this on the podcast.
No, I like it, man. I like it.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, a good experience.
Yeah, overall, it really wasn't all that bad, man. Like, I've done a lot harder things for less, so there's that. but yeah, it wasn't a hard time. It wasn't a bad time. I learned a little bit about wildland firefighting, and I'll probably go into depth a little bit of that more in a later episode. But learned a little bit about that. Definitely kind of got a feel for different parts of the country and how they feel about what's going on lately. And it was interesting too, being over there, especially as close to the Maui fire. Like I've yet to meet a person that I've talked to at one of these roadblocks that was not that doesn't believe that the Maui fire was started by a direct energy weapon.
Oh
Every
shit.
single person I've talked to basically believes that like Maui was a DEW.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
I've seen
I
some
mean, for
crazy stuff
better,
online that makes me not doubt it for sure.
I mean, there's definitely some weird stuff out there, and that was the thing was like it literally everyone. I think that was part of the reason for such the animosity this year for the against the Forest Service was there was a lot of distrust in the public, like on the government doing anything fire related, which was rightfully that distrust I think was rightfully earned this year for
Yeah,
sure.
I get it
So
for sure.
yeah, it was really interesting. But speaking of public distrust. I feel like we kind of got to talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, in the sense that so today is the day of recording this. It is Sunday night, September 10th, which
The
means by the time you are
day
hearing this, you are probably hearing this on 9/11.
calm before the storm, man.
So I know one of the things that was kind of rattling in my mind, I was talking to my wife about today, that's kind of hard for me to wrap my head around, is that if you're graduating high school this year, you were born 4 hours. I mean, you were born 4 years after that happened.
That's nuts, dude. Time has gone by quick.
I know. I mean, it makes me feel really old, but it also kind of made me think that, like, like what? So I'm turning 30 this year, and so I was in first or second grade when it happened, and I remember seeing it on a lot of it on TV
Same.
and not really fully understanding what's going on. Like I knew something bad was happening, but I didn't know like I knew it was bad. I knew there was really bad stuff going on because I could pick up on everybody else's motions around me. But it was just like, you didn't quite fully understand. And as I grew up a little bit older and school had the remembrance ceremonies, it became way more apparent and dawned on me like what I lived through and what I saw. And it was one of those things to where I think it'll never have the impact on me that it had on my mom, but it'll never have the impact on my kids that it had on me.
Same. I was in fourth grade, and like you said, I remember exactly where I was. We were in the classroom. We actually got sent home early because they didn't know if it was going to be a continued terrorist attack or what. But that was a crazy day, and yeah, man. My son, I have a son, and he's 13, and obviously I talked to him about it, and he knows about it. They still do the remembrances and stuff every year, but it was just it was a crazy time because I'm 32, so that was the first, like, that was literally on homeland, and I remember watching the second plane, like, live, and
Yeah.
that was, like, gives me goosebumps right now, man. That was crazy, man.
It's one of those things that I think that event for a majority of the people that listen to the show and a majority of the people that we all follow back and forth on Instagram, like that one event shaped the rest of our lives.
Big time.
And I think part of that is, a lot of us, a lot of people me included, joined the military because of that. And there was just something in the back of my head that just never let that go. And like that was a big driving factor. Granted, by the time I got in 2013, that's 12 years after that, and but it was part of that, it's like I felt like I had to go get some kind of vengeance or something still.
Big time.
And so I know there was that part, but I think the biggest thing for a lot of us, and I think maybe it's the reason our generation is the way it is that I think that was at such a young age we got to see that the world was not as safe as we thought it was.
Yes, big time for sure. That's true.
Yeah. And we grew up with that. We grew up knowing that knowledge at a very young age. And I think that I'd be really curious to see like if you did like a survey or something, on it. But I wonder if that's what played the big role in a majority of us becoming, the kind of Minuteman preparedness prepper type people that we are. Is, we grew up, and one of our, early memories of childhood is, one of the most dangerous attacks on American soil to date.
Yes.
And then, the war that followed with it, and all the propaganda that came out of it, and all the questioning of the government that came out of it. And it just really makes me wonder if, if you look back on history, 100 years from now, you'll see like, yeah, that's the reason this generation was was always so concerned with crap going on, is they lived through it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a huge point, man.
So yeah, it was something that kind of was kind of thinking about today, was like, I wonder, I wonder if that's why I am the way I am.
No, I mean, I don't think you're wrong there. I feel like it definitely shaped us, and I don't know, like you said, if it's this new generation is just, they think it's just like soft in general, but it definitely made us realize that everything's not just, cupcakes, and also made us realize that as much as people want to say it'll never happen, people could still come here if they wanted. You know what I mean? Whether it was small insurgency groups,
Yeah.
whatever. But that's a whole other story. But basically, you don't know if you could trust the government, because who knows who was behind that still to this day. That's a whole other story as well. But definitely, like you said, it made us realize, or at least our generation realized, that it's not like they want to make it seem on the social media and the TV and all that, and unicorns and everything's fine and dandy, that you actually should prepare, and you should become a capable and I would say resourceful citizen and a prepared
Yeah.
citizen. There we go. Are
Absolutely.
you going to be an
It just
asset or a liability if something were to happen? I think that's what
exactly.
it comes down to.
One of the things I kind of think about sometimes is, we always see the TikToks and social medias and stuff about like, oh man, I really like kind of want to not live through, historical events every week, right? Like all like way between COVID and all this other stuff and everything, like, oh man, every week's another like unprecedented historical event.
Mm-hmm.
And I know like a lot of people get freaked out about that, but one of the things that kind of gives me hope, in the sense of thinking like maybe things aren't as bad as they make them seem, is that sometimes I think back to my grandparents. My grandparents were born in 1939 and 1941. So they lived as children through World War II, Korea, Vietnam, JFK's assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, 9/11, um, the bombing by Timothy McVeigh in Oklahoma City, Waco. Like they lived through all of that, right?
Cuban Missile Crisis, yeah, all that stuff.
And like my grandfather saw Saigon fall and Afghanistan fall, you know, and it's one of those things where it's like,
No wonder that
you
generation's
know,
even tougher, dude.
yeah, well, I mean, it's one of those things where I think like, we're always talking about like, oh man, these are unprecedented times. Sometimes I wonder like, is that just because we didn't learn our history?
Yeah.
Because like, and so that's one of those things that just gives me a little bit of hope that like, I know things are bad. I'm not downplaying that they're not, but just thinking like maybe in the perspective of like greater things, that maybe it's not quite as bad as we think.
No, I get what you're saying. It makes sense big time.
Like don't be a total doomer. There's light at the end of the tunnel. It could be worse.
Yeah, no, big time.
But yeah, man, it's good to see you back. I'm glad to have
Appreciate
you
it.
on here, dude. I know life gets crazy sometimes, and sometimes we miss episodes. Sometimes we got life stuff going on, so it's good to see you. It's good to have you on here. It's good to get back together with you, man.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me. I'd love to come back on here and maybe, like you said, maybe we could talk a little bit more about the whole Minuteman collab we were doing, and kind of go over some other topics, because I would love to be back on here, man. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for those who are unaware, me and TapRackTyler a little while ago put together an intro for a series we're going to try to do as time allows for a Minuteman logistics type of series, kind of a Minuteman beginner series, more or less, of kind of like where to start, right? Each episode focusing on a different aspect, covering everything you need to know from basics to more complicated stuff, and just kind of go in kind of a discussion similar to this, but on YouTube, of things to look for, products to wear, like kind of a hey, we let us be the example of the mistakes not to make and learn from our example. Like, don't go out and buy 30 different things. Let us tell you which one or five, are probably better, so you don't waste your money on them.
Don't be the guy running some random exotic caliber in the group.
Okay, so I got to put my 2 cents out there with that too. I mentioned this in a different previous episode. I like military surplus stuff because I like the history behind it. But I also know that, like, if the crap hits the fan, I'm not grabbing some obscure caliber for like a 1900s rifle.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. You can have fun with the
But
calibers, but my bad, go ahead.
but somewhere deep in my brain is just like the undying hope that I get to be the guy that, like, puts down a communist with an obscure 1900s caliber rifle. Like I just imagine, like, if you see like the like a movie scene where they have like all the cars piled up like a barricade and the marauders are coming after us during doomsday, and we're rallying the townspeople together, and I've just emptied my gun safe to the local, protective force so we can protect our town. That as the camera pans, you'll see me with my modern rifles, and then down the road you'll see somebody else with my rolling block, somebody else with my infield, and someone's getting a kill with that single shot rifle. Like, that's like my people talk about like the ultimate male fantasy. That is my ultimate male fantasy. Like,
That's solid, dude. Yeah, for sure.
you got
Just picturing
some
that.
yeah, you get some mountain man looking dude out there just smoking people with my
Single
seven
shot
millimeter
rifle.
rolling block, just popping dudes, just like, yes,
Doesn't
get
get
him,
more
Jimmy.
American than that, dude.
Yeah, just he's got like 6 notches on the buttstock, just like, hell yeah.
Yeah, dude. No, I'm looking forward to it, man. And kind of like we were talking about earlier, whether obviously we never want to be the guy that thinks we know everything, but just for some of you listeners out there that think you might know a lot about logistics and Minuteman preparedness and water filtration, etc., just make sure to tune in. I'm sure we're all going to learn a bit. I know I'm going to learn a lot. I'm looking forward to it. So we'll definitely work on getting the actual episodes going, and like you said, we're going to break them down into detail. For example, the first one we'll probably go over, I believe we were talking water and food storage, filtration, etc. Yeah, so looking forward to it. Make sure to tune in if you guys get a chance. It'll be on TapRackTyler, TapRackTyler. That's on YouTube, and we'll also do little shorts of it on Instagram as well. So again, I appreciate you, Austin. I appreciate you having me on here, and I'm looking forward to that, man.
Yeah, man, no problem. Thanks for being on such short notice. I really appreciate it. It's always better when I have another person on here because I feel like my solo rants just get a little wild.
Oh, dude, yeah, man. No worries. I appreciate you having me.
I,
And sorry for you listeners if I was kind of mumbling a little bit or kind of hitting you with some uhs and ands, but yeah, man, I had a great time on here, man.
yeah, dude, I appreciate you having being on here. I don't feel like I'm quite as qualified for schizo rants as someone like Risky Krisky, who can usually pull it off by himself. I usually
Yeah,
I at least need someone else to acknowledge me.
love me some Krisky rants, dude. I hear you, man, for sure. I hear you. I'm always same thing with doing the YouTube thing, man. I'm over here talking to the camera by myself. Like, I really wish I had someone else right here with me, dude, so I could talk to, kind of explain, go over stuff a little bit better. But I
Yeah,
hear
it
you, man.
makes me it makes me feel like less of a crazy person.
Yeah, for sure. I hear you, dude.
All right, dude. Well, thanks for coming on here, man. I'll make sure I get your socials down in the description.
Yeah, man, I
For everyone
appreciate it.
listening, yeah, absolutely. For everyone listening, thanks for tuning in again. It's been another episode of Mid Tier Thoughts. Keep doing what you do. Keep being awesome. We appreciate the support. Have a good one.
See you on the next one.